Okay, so complete about turn. I like to start each day off with the headlines in politics. Joining me today is Jack Rowlett, who is a political commentator. Joins me now. Jack, thank you so much for joining me today. Yeah. Now, listen, Jack, we hear ad nauseum about Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak, and I'm going to come to them in just a moment. But I just thought, while we're getting all these headlines on what's happening between the leadership contenders, Labour is grappling with their own problems because of all of these strikes. Now, back in the day, and you're way too young to remember, I remember the picket lines. My parents were both in nursing unions and what have you. Labour stood for unions. They were there on the picket lines. Keir Starmer finds himself in a pretty tricky situation with all the strikes coming up. Does Labour get behind those strikers or not?
Yeah, I think this is the big problem for Keir Starmer, is actually that he hasn't made a decision. What he needs to do is he needs to either get behind the strikers or he needs to go full on right of the Labour Party saying, no, we're not in favour of strikes. We're going to try and get into government. And then when we're there, we'll make conditions and pay for working people better. And I think that's the real problem here, is it raises two key questions about Keir Starmer's leadership, which have come up repeatedly since he took office in April of 2020. And one of those is indecision. He was indecisive over lockdowns. He was indecisive when he was trying to reshuffle his shadow cabinet around a year ago after the catastrophic local elections, trying to get rid of Angela Rayner and Lisa Nandy, and couldn't in the end. And that makes him look weak. And then the other issue is the sort of disingenuousness which seems to surround him. He ran in the Labour leadership contest saying, I will be Jeremy Corbyn, I will have that economic radicalism, but I will wear better suits, I'll deal with anti-Semitism, and I'll make the Labour Party electable again. And actually, what he's done since then is he's gone back on a lot of those promises. So he pledged, for example, to nationalise rail and utilities. He's now gone back on that, and he pledged to stand up for workers' rights. And some people are arguing that he's now not following through on that either. And what we've seen in the papers today is that there could be real financial consequences for the Labour Party now, because the big unions, one of which is Unite, are threatening to potentially pull funding from the Labour Party. And the unions make up millions of pounds worth of funding to Labour. Yeah. And they're threatening to pull that funding over Keir Starmer's reversal of the commitments he made in the Labour leadership contest. And I think this is going to become a real problem for him. And I think really he's quite lucky that, as you said at the top, all of the focus is on Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak right now, rather than the absolute chaos that's happening in the Labour Party.
And he's disenfranchising the grassroots of the Labour Party. The Labour Party has traditionally always been the workers, hasn't it? In the days of Jack Straw and all of those politicians who actually had a job, either shoveling coal or what have you, it was always on the side of the workers. There's going to be a huge number of disenfranchised voters out there who already had a bit of a problem, let me say, with the fact that he's Sir Keir Starmer, because again, traditionally, a Labour leader was not a Sir or what have you. And as you said, this flip-flopping of, Jeremy Corbyn in nice suits. It speaks to everyone and no one. And as you mentioned, or as we keep saying, Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak, the battle continues. So the latest is, I don't know if the media is being a little bit tough on Rishi Sunak. His speech that was covered, where he appeared to be quote unquote bragging about diverting funds from tough areas, struggling areas, to areas like Tunbridge Wells. But he says that's about taking stuff from cities and giving it to rural areas.
Yeah, I think what defenders of Rishi Sunak would say is that actually it's just as noble a goal to try and level up areas of the country experiencing poverty that aren't in the Midlands or the North. In the Southwest, where my family live, there's a huge amount of rural deprivation and poverty that doesn't really get talked about, because all of the focus of levelling up is on the North. But I think this raises a broader question about Rishi Sunak's judgment, in that it was clearly such a silly thing to say, and especially on camera at a leadership event as well. And this should have been a good week for Rishi Sunak. This should have been a week that enabled him to perhaps make a recovery in the polls, because Liz Truss earlier this week had a huge gaffe on levelling up. She pledged that she was going to cut £8 billion worth of public sector pay for teachers, doctors, police officers outside of London and the South East. And of course, she backtracked on that very quickly, and she ended up blaming the media for misinterpreting the press release. But it's hard to have interpreted it any other way. And then, of course, yesterday we had the Bank of England with their really gloomy projections about where the economy is going to be over the next sort of year and a half. And that feeds into Rishi Sunak's argument that inflation is the big concern right now, that there isn't going to be the fiscal headroom for huge tax cuts. And what this has done is it's moved the conversation back onto Rishi Sunak potentially being out of touch, which we've already seen earlier on in the campaign. Of course, we had that video that came out where he, from the early noughties, where he claimed not to have any working class friends. We've had all the sort of dodgy stuff over tax arrangements, and it's really bad for his image, and it's really stunted any potential, I think, to make a recovery. And I think the problem now is that this leadership campaign just seems to go on and on and on. We've still got another month to go, and it's just causing so much damage. People just want solutions.
When you say that we've got another month to go, I'm like, oh, please, Jack, I'm sure, thank you so much. I'm sure we're going to be talking to you again about that. Lovely talking to you today, just with the headlines on both sides of the political aisle. Jack Rowlett there. He's great, isn't he?